In this video, we're going to talk about why the Sony A7C Mark II may have a lot of limitations over the Sony A7 IV, and why this time the Sony A7C Mark II may now be kind of like what the Sony A7C Mark I was towards the Sony A7 III. Let's get started. Welcome back, guys. Let's start right here. So yeah, first of all, today I'm shooting with none of the lights. The window is open and I have my key light and rim light right here. So let's try something different. But anyway, so today we're here to talk about the Sony A7C Mark II and why I think this camera may actually surprise a lot of people or disappoint some other folks that have been waiting for this camera. Pretty much every time I release a video, there are a couple of comments of people asking me, when is the Sony A7C Mark II coming up and should I wait for this camera? And one thing that I can tell people is that don't wait for a camera to be released to start creating. Get what you can get today and start creating today, especially if that entails your livelihood. So let's talk about the Sony A7C Mark I and the Sony A7 III so we can understand where this camera is heading. When the Sony A7C Mark I was released, it was pretty much a regurgitation of the Sony A7 III into a smaller body. So when it comes to photography, pretty much we had no loss in there, same image quality. The only thing is that the shutter speed was capped at 1/4000 of a second for the sake of, crippling the camera a little bit, but I don't know why, because the Sony A7 III did 1/8000. Now, when it came to video specs, this camera was pretty much everything the Sony A7 III was, plus more. So with the Sony A7C, we saw a lot of advantages. Like for example, if you were using a camera to film yourself, now you have the flip out screen that, allowed you to see yourself, but that was pretty much it. No new menus, no touchscreen capabilities. Now we have, the Sony A7 IV, which is a camera that is great. It has a 33 megapixel sensor and it outputs 4K video up to 60p and 10-bit 4:2, and it also does 8-bit. And let's go to the 8-bit part, because I think that the Sony A7C is going to have a lot of those features that we have in the Sony A7 IV in 8-bit only. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So the Sony A7C is going to have some limitations, and that limitation is going to be, number one, we are going to have a tiny EVF, same limitations that we have with the first Mark I version, but now we have a smaller body and trying to output 4K video at 10-bit 4:2. Now, with the release of the Sony ZVE1, we know where that goes. And, a lot of people are complaining about the overheating issues that they're experiencing with the Sony ZVE1. And the body of that camera is pretty much like a Sony A7C. Now, I actually posted a video that you can check right here, how I recorded for over 5 hours with no heat limitations. But, most people are experiencing those limitations. And heat, it is a problem, especially when shooting outdoor hot conditions. So that's going to be a problem with smaller cameras. So the Sony A7C, knowing that the Sony A7 IV can do 4K video up to 60p 10-bit 4:2, I think the Sony may actually cap this camera to do 4K up to 30p and 10-bit 4:2. But when it comes to all the faster frame rates like the 60 and 120, which I don't think is going to be in 4K, Sony may actually cap those frame rates at 8-bit 420. Now, a lot of people are excited about the 60p capabilities for the Sony A7C Mark II because, it's very flexible. But, in my opinion, Sony could potentially cap this at 8-bit 420. Now let's talk about where we are going to see massive improvements over the prior version. I don't think that's going to be on the EVF, so I'm not even going to talk about that because it's going to be most likely the same EVF after Sony A7C Mark I. But where we are going to see massive improvements is on the screen of the camera. The flip out screen is now going to have better resolution and of course the new menus with touchscreen capabilities. Now the other thing is that the Sony A7C Mark II is very likely that it's going to have the same screen from the Sony FX30, which is a 2.6 million dots in resolution. This will make this screen more than 2.5 times the resolution of the Sony A7C Mark I version. And to me, that's actually really important to have better image quality, perhaps a brighter display, and having all those touch functionality. When it comes to video spec, guys, expect this camera to have less than what the Sony A7 IV can do for the following reasons. Number one, the Sony A7 IV right now goes about $2,500. Then we have the Sony ZVE1, which is a video dedicated camera that goes for around $2,200, $2,300. And it's a camera that does better at video, doesn't have a shutter, and can do photography, but it does it only at 12 megapixels. So this camera is going to have to calibrate all the features. And this is one of the reasons why we are at a different time that when the Sony A7C Mark I was released, because none of these cameras that I'm talking about existed before. So Sony is going to try to position this camera in a place where sales from the Sony A7 IV are not going to be jeopardized, but also where sales from the Sony ZVE1 are not going to be jeopardized neither. And even if Sony, released this camera being 4K up to 60p, I think that in many ways people would opt for this camera versus the Sony ZVE1, even though if you can now output 4K video at 120 frames per second in 10-bit. And remember, the Sony ZVE1 is due to have an update that's going to allow you to shoot 120 frames per second. And the reason why we haven't seen it is probably because of heat, and Sony's still trying to figure it out how they're going to manage that, or how they're going to streamline, aka cripple that video codec in the ZVE1. So guys, let me know which features do you think from the Sony A7C Mark II are going to be stripped down from the Sony A7 IV. Let me know in the comments down below, and feel free to add anything else that you want to this future release. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.